When the tornado hit Cedar Grove that spring evening, it did more than just reshape the landscape, it rewrote destinies. In the howling chaos of splintered homes and flying debris, Mark Thompson didn't think twice about diving into the rubble when he heard a faint cry for help. A single father struggling to make ends meet, he had nothing to his name except his courage and a stubborn refusal to let anyone die on his watch. What he couldn't know, as he shielded this stranger from falling beams and guided her to safety, was that she held the power to change his life forever. But could the woman he saved truly be the reclusive billionaire whose mansion loomed on the horizon? And what would happen when their paths crossed again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through faded curtains as Mark Thompson stood at the stove, carefully flipping pancakes. Each golden disc was a small masterpiece of timing and patience, skills he'd perfected in the 3 years since Sarah's passing. A handmade birthday card sat propped against the sugar bowl, its crooked letters spelling out "World's Best Dad" in rainbow colors. His daughter Jenny's artistic tribute had earned a permanent place at their breakfast table, a daily reminder of why he pushed through the hard days. "Dad, you're burning the edges again," Jenny's voice carried from the cramped living room where she sat cross-legged, pulling on her worn sneakers. At 13, she noticed everything, including the slight tremor in his hands as he rescued the slightly darkened pancake. "Just adding some character to it, sweetheart," he called back, sliding the pancake onto a chipped plate. Their morning ritual continued despite the pile of unopened bills on the counter beside them. Mark had positioned them face down, but their presence weighed on him like stones in his pocket. The construction company where he worked as a foreman had been cutting hours lately. Cedar Grove wasn't exactly booming with new development, and the regional recession had hit their small town particularly hard. Still, Mark managed to keep his crew employed, even if it meant taking on smaller residential jobs that barely covered costs. Jenny appeared at his elbow, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her mother's signature style. "Did you remember to sign my permission slip for the science field trip?" She reached for the syrup, then hesitated. "Unless it's too expensive this month. Mrs. Rodriguez said some parents were having trouble with the fee." Mark's throat tightened. $35 shouldn't feel like a mountain to climb. "Already signed it, kiddo. It's in my wallet." He hadn't signed it yet, but he'd figure something out. Maybe Tom at the hardware store needed some weekend help again. The ancient radio on the windowsill crackled with the morning weather report as they ate. Spring in Oklahoma meant keeping one ear tuned to the forecasts, especially with storm season approaching. The meteorologist's voice faded in and out through static, unseasonably warm temperatures, potential for severe weather development. "Think we'll get a big one this year?" Jenny asked around a mouthful of pancake. Her eyes held no fear, just the familiar curiosity of a child raised in Tornado Alley. "Third generation," Mark's father would have said proudly. "Mother Nature keeps her own counsel," Mark replied, echoing his father's words, "but we're ready if she decides to visit." Their storm cellar was stocked and maintained, one of the few things he never let slide, no matter how tight money got. After breakfast, Jenny grabbed her backpack, its worn straps reinforced with duct tape, Mark's handiwork. She paused at the door, looking back at the kitchen with an expression too mature for her years. "Dad? We're okay, right?" Mark crossed the room in 3 strides, enveloping her in a hug that smelled of maple syrup and strawberry shampoo. "We're better than okay, sweetheart. We've got each other." He felt her relax against him, 13 years of trust weighing no more than the day he'd first held her. The school bus's distant rumble broke their moment. Jenny squeezed him once more before darting out the door, her sneakers slapping against the cracked sidewalk. Mark watched until she climbed aboard, exchanging waves through the smudged bus window. Back inside, he finally turned the bills face up. Electric, gas, mortgage, insurance. Each envelope a reminder of promises he struggled to keep. The construction company's outlook wasn't improving, and his savings had dwindled to almost nothing. But somewhere in the stack was Jenny's field. Trip permission slip, and that at least he could handle today. Mark pulled on his work boots, their steel toes scratched from years of faithful service. Outside, the spring air carried a hint of something unsettled, a restlessness that made the leaves shiver on their branches. The weather radio's morning warning echoed in his mind as he climbed into his truck, its engine protesting briefly before catching. The day ahead would bring its own challenges, but for now, Mark held onto the warmth of morning pancakes and his daughter's trust. In Cedar Grove, that was worth more than any bank balance. Elena Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her study, watching dawn creep across the Oklahoma plains. Her estate's grounds stretched toward Cedar Grove's distant water tower, a landscape she usually only saw through bulletproof glass. The latest issue of Tech Innovator magazine lay open on her desk, her own image staring back at her. Elena Chen, the invisible empress of Silicon Valley's new frontier. The photographer had caught her in profile, power suit immaculate, expression uncarefully neutral. The article praised her brilliance, her vision, her revolutionary quantum computing breakthroughs. What it couldn't capture was the hollow echo of footsteps in empty hallways, or the weight of eating dinner alone at a table meant for 20. Ms. Chen, her house manager Richards, appeared silently at her elbow. Your 7 a.m. video conference is ready. The Tokyo board members are waiting. Elena nodded, turning away from the window. Thank you, Richards. And the other matter? The property acquisition in Cedar Grove is complicated. The owners are resistant to selling, even at twice market value. They cite family history, community ties. He hesitated. Perhaps if you were to meet with them personally. That won't be necessary. Eleanor settled into her chair, adjusting her laptop screen. The quantum computing facility she planned would revitalize the region, but she had learned long ago that personal involvement only complicated business decisions. Increase the offer. Everyone has a price. Richards withdrew, leaving Elena to face the grid of expectant faces on her screen. Board members and investors, all wanting their piece of her time, their slice of her success. She began her presentation with practiced precision, her voice steady as she outlined the next quarter's projections. 2 hours later, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet. Her father's voice echoed from memory. Success is a fortress, little dragon. Build it high enough, and nothing can hurt you. She'd followed his advice, building walls of wealth and achievement that would have made him proud, but lately the fortress felt more like a prison. The local newspaper lay unopened beside the magazine. Elena rarely bothered with it, but today's headline caught her eye. Cedar Grove Community Center faces closure. Below it, a photo showed children playing basketball in a dilapidated gym. Their faces shone with joy despite the peeling paint and broken scoreboard. She reached for her phone, then stopped herself. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the Tokyo deal hanging by a thread and the quantum facility timeline tightening. And yet, Richards? She pressed the intercom button. Get me everything you can on the community center. Budget reports, structural assessments, attendance numbers. Of course, Ms. Chen. Will you be reconsidering the property acquisition strategy? Elena's fingers traced the edges of the newspaper photo. No, but perhaps we can explore alternative approaches to community integration. She turned back to the window, watching clouds gather on the horizon. The morning weather report had mentioned potential storms, a common enough occurrence in Oklahoma spring. From up here, they seemed distant, unthreatening, like the town itself, with its quaint streets and modest homes, a world apart from the steel and glass fortress she'd built around herself. Her phone buzzed. Another crisis, another decision needed, another wall to maintain. Elena straightened her shoulders, slipping back into the role of the invisible empress, but her eyes kept drifting to the newspaper, to those children's faces. alight with simple joy. The quantum facility would change everything for Cedar Grove. Progress was inevitable, necessary. Yet for the first time in years, Elena felt an unfamiliar doubt creeping through the cracks in her carefully constructed world. What good was building the future if you never stepped foot in the present? "Richards," she called again, "cancel my afternoon meetings. All of them, Ms. Chen." His surprise was evident even through the intercom. "The Berlin investors will wait. I need to see something for myself." Thunder rolled in the distance as Elena gathered her coat. She couldn't remember the last time she'd driven herself, anywhere, but her Porsche's keys felt right in her hand. Sometimes walls needed to come down before something better could be built in their place. The old photo album lay open on Mark's dashboard as he ate lunch in his truck, a ham sandwich forgotten in his hand. The construction site hummed behind him, but his attention was fixed on a particular photograph. Sarah holding newborn Jenny, both of them framed by the morning light in Cedar Grove General Hospital. His late wife's smile remained as bright as ever, untouched by time or tragedy. The album had survived 3 generations of Thompsons, its leather cover cracked but sturdy. His father had added pictures of tornado damage from '85. His grandfather had documented the rebuild of '62, each disaster and recovery captured in fading color and crisp black and white, a visual history of their family's resilience. "Mark!" Tom's voice cut through his reverie. "Channel 4's saying we got trouble brewing." The job site's radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Strong supercell development expected by late afternoon. The National Weather Service has issued a severe thunderstorm watch for the following counties." Mark carefully closed the album and tucked it into his glove compartment. "All right, let's button everything down," he called out to his crew. "Nobody goes home until every loose board is secured." Across town, Jenny's middle school was already implementing storm procedures. Mark's phone buzzed with a text. "Dad, they're keeping us late because of the weather. Ms. Rodriguez says it's safer here than on buses." "Smart lady," he typed back. "Stay put, sweetheart. I'll come get you when they give the all clear." He added a heart emoji. Jenny had taught him how, insisting it was essential dad knowledge. The sky darkened prematurely, taking on that sickly green tinge that every Oklahoman knew to fear. Mark's crew worked with practiced efficiency, securing equipment and materials. These men had weathered storms together before. They moved like a well-oiled machine. On the outskirts of town, Elena Chen stood in her private observatory, watching. Real-time radar imagery paint itself across multiple screens. The quantum computing facility's construction plans lay forgotten on a nearby table as she tracked the storm's development. "The local authorities are issuing preliminary warnings," Richards reported. "Should we begin emergency protocols?" Elena studied the radar patterns, remembering similar storms from her childhood in Taiwan. "Yes, full lockdown, and get me the contact information for Cedar Grove's emergency services. We may need to offer shelter." Her fortress-like estate had been built to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. The basement level could house hundreds, though it had never been needed. Eleanor found herself hoping it would remain that way, even as the wind began to pick up outside. Her windows. Back at the construction site, Mark's phone chirped with the first tornado warning of the day. The crews were already dispersing, heading home to their families and their storm cellars. He looked toward Jenny's school, barely visible through the darkening air. The photo album seemed to weigh heavy in his glove compartment. Sarah had died on a bright, clear day. No warning, no chance to prepare, just a drunk driver and a split second of tragedy. But storms, at least, gave you a fighting chance if you respected them enough to listen. "Mr. Thompson?" A small voice. It drew his attention. Carlos, one of his newer workers, stood nervously by the truck. "My car won't start. I hate to ask, but—" "Hop in," Mark said without hesitation. "We'll get you home." Some things mattered more than rushing to safety. His father had taught him that, along with everything else about surviving in Tornado Alley. The first heavy drops began to fall as they pulled away from the site. Thunder rolled overhead, no longer distant. Mark glanced at his rearview mirror, watching the clouds organize themselves into something ominous. In her observatory, Elena's, screens flashed with updated warnings. The storm was intensifying faster than predicted. She found herself zooming in on Cedar Grove's street map, studying the modest grid of homes and businesses. From up here, they looked so vulnerable. Ms. Chen, Richards appeared again. The emergency protocols are in place, but he paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. There's a situation in town. The community center you inquired about. It's being used as an overflow shelter, but the roof is compromised. Elena's fingers tightened on her desk. Get my car ready. Ms. Chen, with all due respect, it's not safe to... Get my car ready, she repeated, already reaching for her coat. And contact our contractors. I want structural engineers on standby. The wind howled against her windows as she gathered. Her things. Sometimes walls weren't enough. Sometimes you had to step into the storm to make a difference. Mark's father's pocket watch, a Thompson family heirloom, ticked steadily in his truck's cup holder as he and Carlos raced against darkening skies. Its scratched face had marked time through 3 generations of storms, weddings, and births. Today, it would mark something else entirely. The radio cut through static with increasing urgency. Tornado warning issued for Cedar Grove and surrounding areas. Doppler radar indicates rotation. Immediate shelter advised. This is not a drill. Mark's phone lit up with a text from Jenny. Dad, we're all in the basement. Ms. Rodriguez says we're safe. Are you okay? His thumbs fumbled with the reply. I'm fine, baby. Stay put. He glanced at Carlos. Just got to get my friend home, then I'll... The rest of his words vanished in a deafening roar. The tornado dropped from the clouds like God's own fist, its massive funnel churning debris into the air less than a mile ahead. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he made a split-second decision, veering away from Carlos's neighborhood and toward the nearest solid structure, the community center. But my house, Carlos started, is made of wood, Mark cut him off. That building's got concrete foundations and a basement. Trust me. The community center's parking lot was chaos when they arrived. People scrambled for the entrance, some carrying children, others helping elderly neighbors. Mark recognized faces from his construction sites, from Jenny's school, from Sunday groceries at Wilson's Market. Thunder cracked overhead like artillery, fire as they rushed inside. The building's old bones creaked under the storm's assault, but its walls stood firm. Mark helped direct people toward the basement stairs, falling naturally into the role of coordinator. "Watch that ceiling!" he shouted, noting water dripping through spreading cracks. Everyone away from the windows. The pocket watch ticked in his pocket, counting down to something he couldn't yet see. Across town, Elena Chen's Porsche fought against wind-driven debris as she tried to reach the same destination. Her tactical driving training, a necessity for tech executives, was being tested to its limits. The tornado's fury had split her planned route, forcing her to detour through unfamiliar streets. A massive crack split the air. Elena's windshield spiderwebbed as a branch glanced off it. Through the fractured glass, she saw the community center's roof partially collapse. The same building she'd been researching that morning, now trying to shelter dozens of her neighbors, though they didn't know her as anything but the recluse on the hill. She abandoned the car 2 blocks away, the wind trying to tear her coat open as she fought her way forward on foot. The tornado's roar drowned out everything except the thunder of her heart. Inside the community center, Mark was helping the last. Stragglers toward the basement when he heard it, a cry for help, barely audible above the storm. He turned to see a woman stumbling through the front doors, her expensive coat torn, her face bleeding from flying debris. Then the world exploded. The tornado's outer winds caught the building's compromised roof, peeling it back like a sardine can. Mark dove forward, tackling the woman as a support beam crashed down where she'd been standing. They rolled together, behind a concrete pillar, as the storm tried to tear the building apart around them. "Are you hurt?" he shouted above the chaos. The woman shook her head, her eyes wide with a fear that made her look suddenly young, despite her elegant bearing. "The basement?" Mark said, pointing toward the stairs. "We have to—" Another section of roof gave way. Mark covered the woman with his body as debris rained down, feeling something slash across his back. The pocket watch dug into his ribs, its steady ticking now lost in the storm's symphony. They crawled together through the wreckage, Mark leading the way. A child's crying guided them toward the basement stairs. Each foot of progress was a battle against wind and falling debris. The woman stumbled once, and Mark caught her without thinking, his construction-hardened hands steady on her shoulders. The basement door appeared through the dust and darkness. Mark wrenched it open, pushing the woman through first. As they stumbled down the stairs, the building groaned like a dying beast above them. In the basement's relative quiet, emergency lights cast everything in a sickly glow. Dozens of faces turned toward them, the last arrivals. Mark saw Carlos organizing blankets, Mrs. Rodriguez comforting crying children, Mr. Wilson from the market, leading a prayer circle. The woman he'd saved stood apart, trying to catch her breath. Blood matted her hair, and her torn designer clothes seemed out of place among the town's sturdy cotton and denim. She turned to thank him, but before she could speak, the tornado hit with full force. The building's death rattle shook dust from the ceiling. Children screamed. Mark found himself reaching for the stranger's hand in the darkness, feeling her grip tighten as the world above them was torn apart. The pocket watch, faithfully marking Thompson family moments for 3 generations, stopped at exactly 5:47 p.m. Later, Mark would remember his father saying that time behaved differently during tornadoes, stretching moments into eternities, compressing hours into heartbeats. When the roar finally faded to a distant growl, Mark realized he was still holding the woman's hand. She withdrew it slowly, something unreadable passing across her face. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice cultured but shaken. "I don't know how to—" "Dad!" Jenny's voice cut through the basement's hushed aftermath. She appeared from the crowd and threw herself into his arms. "The school bus got us here just before. Are you bleeding?" Mark had forgotten the cut on his back until that moment. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, throbbing pain. When he looked up again, the woman was gone, swallowed by the crowd of shell-shocked survivors. Only the lingering warmth in his hand proved she had been real at all. Above them, Cedar Grove lay transformed. The tornado had redrawn the map of their small town with brutal indifference. But in that basement, surrounded by neighbors helping. Neighbors, Mark felt the first stirrings of what would come next. Tomorrow would bring its own storms, rebuilding, recovering, reimagining. But tonight, they had survived. Tonight, that was enough. Dawn broke over a changed Cedar Grove, painting the wreckage in soft gold that did nothing to soften the devastation. Mark stood in what remained of his front yard, turning his house key over and over in his hand. A useless thing now. The tornado had taken half his roof and most of his walls, leaving his and Jenny's lives scattered across 3 counties. The morning news crews were already setting up their cameras at the end of the street, their satellite trucks incongruous among the debris. Mark had sent Jenny to stay with her aunt in Oklahoma City, away from the chaos. She'd gone reluctantly, clutching her backpack of salvaged treasures. "Thompson!" Carlos approached, his work boots crunching over scattered shingles. "You saved my life yesterday, man. My house, it's gone, but I'm here because of you." He gripped Mark's shoulder. "The crew's gathering at what's left of the community center. We're organizing cleanup teams." Mark nodded, pocketing the now meaningless key. "I'll be there, just need a minute to—" He didn't finish the sentence. What exactly did you do when everything you'd built lay in splinters around you? The insurance would cover some of it, but his coverage had been basic at best. Jenny's college fund, what little he'd managed to save, would have to go toward rebuilding. A convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly down the debris-cleared main street, followed by several construction vehicles bearing unfamiliar logos. The vehicle stopped at the community center, and a flutter of activity emerged from them. Men in suits consulted tablets while workers in hard hats began assessing the damage with professional efficiency. "Who are they?" Carlos wondered aloud. Mark was about to reply when he saw her. The woman from yesterday emerged from one of the SUVs, her cuts cleaned and bandaged, her bearing regal despite the circumstances. Gone was the storm-tossed stranger he'd pulled from the wreckage. In her place stood someone who commanded attention, without asking for it. "Is that?" Carlos's voice dropped to a whisper. "Man, that's Elena Chen, the tech billionaire. They say her estate out past the ridge cost more than our whole town." Mark watched as she directed her team with quiet authority, pointing out areas of structural concern in the community center. She looked different in the morning light, more remote, less human than the woman whose hand he'd held in the darkness. A suited man approached them, tablet in hand. "Mr. Thompson, Mark Thompson." Mark nodded, suddenly conscious of his dirty clothes and unshaven face. "Ms. Chen would like a word, if you have a moment." Before Mark could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. "Mr. Thompson can speak for himself, Richards." Elena Chen stood before them, her presence drawing every eye in the vicinity. "Though I understand if you're too busy with recovery efforts." There was something in her voice, a hint of the frightened woman from yesterday, carefully hidden beneath layers of corporate polish. She held out her hand, and Mark found himself taking it automatically. "I believe I owe you my life," she said simply, "and I'd like to discuss how I might repay that debt." Mark started to protest, but she held up a hand. "Please, I've spent the morning reviewing the damage assessments. This town needs help, real help, not just emergency funds and temporary fixes. I have resources that could make a difference, and I need someone who knows Cedar Grove's heart to help guide that process." Her eyes met his directly. Someone who understands that some things are worth more than their dollar value. The key, in Mark's pocket, seemed to grow heavier. Behind Elena, her teams were already at work, bringing order to chaos with practiced efficiency. He thought of Jenny's face when she'd seen their ruined home, of the community center's basement full of neighbors helping neighbors, of his father's lessons about responsibility to community. "I don't need," he began. "This isn't charity," Elena cut in, her tone softening. "This is an investment in something I witnessed firsthand yesterday, something I'd like to be part of, if you'll help me understand how." The morning sun caught the edge of his ruined roof, and for a moment Mark could almost see what she was seeing, not just the destruction, but the possibility hidden within it. His key might not fit his old door anymore, but perhaps it could unlock something new. "Where do we start?" he asked. Elena sat in her study, surrounded by holographic displays of Cedar Grove's damage assessments. An unmarked envelope lay on her desk, containing a cashier's check that could rebuild Mark Thompson's house 3 times over. Her finger traced the amount, enough to make a difference, not enough to raise questions. Richards had suggested direct deposit, but Elena understood the value of anonymity, both his and hers. "The background check came back clean," Richards reported, adding another file to her display. "Single father, former military engineer, excellent credit despite recent struggles. His construction company's reputation is impeccable, though they've been hit hard by the recession." Elena studied Mark's file. Honorable discharge, engineering degree, countless small jobs keeping Cedar Grove's infrastructure together through thin years. The man who'd shielded her from falling debris had been doing the same for his whole town, piece by piece, without fanfare or recognition. What about the daughter? Jenny Thompson, 13, honor roll student, particular aptitude for sciences. Her mother died in a car accident 3 years ago. Richards paused. "There's more. Mr. Thompson has been selling his personal tools to cover her school expenses. The tornado destroyed most of what he had left." Eleanor closed the file with a gesture, her mind already mapping out possibilities. "Have our procurement team replace his tools. top quality but nothing flashy. Route it through the General Disaster Relief Fund. And the check? Eleanor picked up the envelope, considering. The amount was significant to Mark, but negligible to her, a rounding error in her daily market fluctuations. Yet something held her back from sending it. "Ms. Chen," Richards prompted. "The longer we wait, the harder the recovery becomes for them." "I know." Elena stood, walking to her window. From here, she could see the cleanup crews in Cedar Grove, tiny figures moving through the destruction like ants, rebuilding a disturbed hill. "But money isn't always the answer, is it? My father taught me that every business decision should multiply value, not just transfer it." She turned back to her displays, expanding the community center's blueprints. "Show me the proposed quantum facility plans again." Richards complied, and a new hologram sprang to life. Sleek buildings, cutting-edge laboratories, a complex that would put Cedar Grove on the technological map. The design was perfect, efficient, cold. Now overlay it with the current town layout. The images merged, and Elena saw what she'd been missing. The facility would dominate the landscape, an alien presence dropped into the heart of a community that had grown organically for generations. The community center, the place where she'd witnessed humanity at its finest, would be reduced to a parking structure. Cancel the check, she decided. Instead, draft a proposal for a community development initiative. Something that preserves what's here while building something new. She smiled slightly, and find out if Mark Thompson's construction company has experience with large-scale projects. "You're considering him for the development contract." Richards couldn't quite keep the surprise from his voice. "Our usual contractors don't know this town, don't understand its rhythms." Elena's fingers traced the path she'd taken through the storm, now marked in red on the holographic map. "We're not just building buildings, Richards. We're rebuilding a community." She brought up another file. The community center's original. Blueprints from 1962, marked with decades of modifications and repairs. Many of the recent work orders bore Mark's signature. Small fixes, volunteer hours, keeping the heart of the town beating on a shoestring budget. "Draft a preliminary contract," she instructed. "Something that gives him authority over local subcontracting with our resources behind it. But keep my name out of the public documentation for now." "May I ask why?" Elena thought of Mark's instinctive protection during the storm, offered without knowledge of who she was or what she could give in return. "Because some things need to grow naturally," she said softly, "and because sometimes the best investments are the ones that don't look like investments at all." She dismissed the holograms with a wave, leaving only the community center's plans glowing in the darkened room. Tomorrow, she would begin reshaping Cedar Grove's future, but tonight she allowed herself to remember the simple human connection, forged in darkness and danger, and the possibility that some walls were worth breaking down. Mark stood over the blueprint spread across a makeshift table in what remained of the community center, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The renovation plans were unlike anything he'd handled before. Cutting-edge materials, sustainable design elements, integrated smart systems that would have seemed like science fiction a week ago. Yet somehow his company's name was listed as the primary contractor. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, tracing the elegant lines of the proposed structure. The budget alone was staggering, with a note guaranteeing priority supply chain, access through some corporation he'd never heard of. Carlos whistled low, looking over his shoulder. "Boss, you see this materials list? That's military-grade stuff. And look at the foundation specs. This thing could survive a direct hit from an F-5. The plans had arrived that morning via courier, along with a letter appointing Mark's company to oversee Cedar Grove's reconstruction initiative. His first instinct had been to refuse. This was way above his pay grade, but then he'd seen the section about local hiring requirements and job training programs. The project would employ half the town, teaching them skills that would last long after the rebuilding was done. "The weird thing is," Carlos continued. I heard Wilson's Market got something similar, plans to rebuild with all these high-tech additions, vertical farming, solar arrays, the works. And the school board? They're talking about a whole new STEM wing for the middle school. Mark nodded slowly. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone wasn't just rebuilding Cedar Grove. They were reimagining it. But who had that kind of resources, that kind of vision? His phone buzzed, a text from Jenny. Dad, Aunt Sarah says I can come home next week. Is it true about the new computer lab they're putting in at school? Before he could reply, a truck pulled up outside. The driver started unloading tools, not cheap hardware store replacements, but professional-grade equipment that made Mark's heart skip. Each piece was exactly like the ones he'd had to sell, only better. There's been a mistake, he told the driver. I didn't order these. The man checked his tablet. Mark Thompson. It's all paid for through the Disaster Relief Fund. Sign here, please. Mark signed, dazed. The relief fund had never covered anything like this before. He picked up a laser level that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage, remembering. The well-dressed woman he'd pulled from the storm. Elena Chen. The reclusive billionaire whose name seemed to hover just at the edges of all this unexplained generosity. Mr. Thompson, a young engineer from one of the assessment teams, approached, tablet in hand. We need your input on the community center's solar array placement. And there's a question about integrating the quantum-ready data infrastructure. The what? It's part of the long-term development plan, she explained, pulling up more blueprints on her tablet. The whole town's being wired for next-generation connectivity. Someone's thinking big. Someone was. Mark looked toward the ridge where Elena Chen's estate stood, barely visible through the morning haze. He remembered her words about investment and community, the way she'd looked at Cedar Grove like she was seeing something more than just another small town on the edge of nowhere. Carlos appeared with coffee in paper cups, handing one to Mark. You know what's really strange? That tech, Billionaire Chen, no one's seen her since the day after the tornado. But her company's fingerprints are all over these contracts. Mark sipped his coffee, thinking about the woman whose hand he'd held in the darkness. There had been something in that moment, a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. He'd felt it again during their brief morning-after conversation, before she'd vanished back into her world of corporate power and private estates. Boss? Carlos gestured to where crews were gathering, ready to begin their day's work. What do you want us to do? Mark looked at the blueprint again, seeing past the technical specifications to what it represented. A chance not just to rebuild, but to reinvent. Whatever game Elena Chen was playing, she'd chosen to play it through him, through the people who knew this town best. We do what we always do, he said, rolling up his sleeves. We build it right. We build it to last. He picked up the new laser level, its weight familiar yet promising in his hands. And maybe we build something more than just buildings along the way. The morning sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the blueprint's vision of a future Cedar Grove. Somewhere, up on that ridge, Mark suspected Elena Chen was watching. For now, that would have to be enough. The Bell Street coffee shop had survived the tornado with only minor damage, making it one of the few normal things left in Cedar Grove. Mark sat at his usual corner table, reviewing contractor bids between sips of black coffee. The receipt for his order sat next to his papers, a humble artifact of ordinary life, continuing despite extraordinary circumstances. Is this seat taken? He looked up to find Elena Chen standing there, holding a cappuccino and looking somehow both perfectly, put together and disarmingly uncertain. Gone was the power suit from their last meeting, replaced by a casual sweater and slacks that probably cost more than his truck. Ms. Chen, he said, starting to rise. Elena, she corrected, settling into the chair across from him before he could stand. And please stay seated. I've had enough formality this week to last a lifetime. The morning regulars tried not to stare, but Mark could feel their attention. Elena Chen, the mystery woman of the mansion, sitting in their local coffee shop like it was the most natural thing in the world. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, gesturing to his paperwork. "Just reviewing some bids for the community center project." He watched her face carefully. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I may have heard something about it. The plans seem ambitious. That's one word for it." Mark leaned back, studying her. "Strange thing is, every time I try to trace where all this is coming from, I hit walls of corporate subsidiaries and private funding initiatives, almost like someone's trying to help without being noticed. Sometimes the most effective help is the kind that empowers others to help themselves." Elena took a sip of her cappuccino, then added softly, "Though I'm beginning to wonder if I got that backwards." Before Mark could respond, the door chimed, and Jenny burst in, still wearing her backpack from the temporary school setup. "Dad, you'll never believe—" She stopped short, recognizing Elena. "Oh, you're her, from the news videos." "Jenny," Mark started, but Elena was already smiling. "You must be the young scientist I've heard about," she said, pulling out another chair. "Your father mentioned you're interested in computer engineering." Jenny's eyes widened. "You know about me. I make it my business to know about bright young minds." Elena's corporate polish softened into something more genuine, especially ones who ace their physics tests while helping run their school's tornado relief program. Mark watched in amazement as his daughter and the billionaire launched into an animated discussion about quantum computing and artificial intelligence. Jenny's words tumbled out in excited bursts, and Elena matched her enthusiasm with patient explanations and encouraging questions. "Dad," Jenny turned to him suddenly, "did you know they're building a real quantum research center here? Like, with actual quantum computers?" "That's still in the planning stages," Elena interjected smoothly, but her eyes met Mark's with a hint of apology. "A lot depends on community support and local partnerships." The pieces clicked into place. The advanced infrastructure in the blueprints, the tech-ready foundations, the educational initiatives. It was all groundwork for something bigger. "Local partnerships," Mark repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Elena set down her cup, her expression turning serious. "What would you call it?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a construction site emergency. 3 different crews needed decisions about the community center's foundation work, and the material deliveries were ahead of schedule. "Go," Eleanor said, understanding. "Immediately. Jenny and I can continue our discussion about quantum entanglement unless—" She glanced at his daughter. "Would you like to see some real quantum computing simulations? I have a few running at my lab." Jenny looked at Mark with pleading eyes. "Dad, please?" He should have hesitated, should have questioned the propriety of letting his daughter spend the afternoon with a virtual stranger, billionaire or not. But he remembered the woman who'd gripped his hand in the darkness, who'd looked at their town's destruction and seen possibility. "Be home for dinner," he said. "And Jenny, no talking Ms. Chen's ear off about your robot design ideas." "Elena," she corrected again, standing, "and I'd actually love to hear about those robots." Mark watched them leave, Jenny chattering excitedly while Elena listened with genuine interest. The coffee shop receipt sat forgotten among his papers, marking the moment when walls began to crumble and new foundations started to form. The business proposal sat between them on Elena's desk, its crisp pages outlining a future that seemed almost too perfect to be real. "Cedar Grove Innovation Partnership," read the header, with Mark's construction company listed as the primary development partner. The quantum research facility was there too, but reimagined, not an imposing corporate complex, but a series of integrated buildings that would grow from the town's existing framework. "You've been planning this since before the tornado," Mark said. It wasn't a question. Elena's fingers traced the edge of the proposal. "The facility, yes, the partnership." She met his eyes. That part evolved. Afternoon sun streamed through her office windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The room spoke of power and precision, yet something had shifted. Since their coffee shop encounter, The corporate armor had developed hairline cracks. "Why me?" he asked. "There are dozens of larger construction firms with more experience in tech infrastructure. Because you understand something they don't." Elena stood, walking to a wall of monitors displaying Cedar Grove's reconstruction progress. "When I was trapped in that community center, I saw how people came together. No corporate hierarchies, no profit margins, just humans helping humans." She turned back to him. "You built that culture, Mark. One project at a time, one neighbor helping another. That wasn't building, that was just—" He shrugged. "Being decent." "Exactly." She smiled, and for a moment he saw the woman from the storm again, the one who'd gripped his hand in the darkness. "Do you know what the biggest problem is in the tech industry? We build amazing things, but we forget why we're building them. We create connections that span the globe, but we lose the human connection in the process." Mark picked up the proposal, studying the section about community integration. Every detail showed a deep understanding of Cedar Grove's needs, from job training programs to small business support initiatives. "Jenny hasn't stopped talking about your lab," he said. "She's already designing improvements for her robot." Elena's face softened. "She's brilliant, they all are. The kids in that temporary classroom dreaming up solutions to problems we haven't even recognized yet." She hesitated. "Mark, I'm not just offering you a construction contract. I'm offering you a chance to help shape the future of your town, to build something that will give those kids a reason to stay, to grow, to create, while giving your company a foothold in the heartland," he added, but without rancor. "Yes," she admitted, "I won't pretend this isn't also a business decision. But it doesn't have to be either or. The best partnerships benefit everyone." Mark thought about Jenny's excited chatter about quantum computing, about his crew learning to work with cutting-edge materials, about the pride in Carlos's voice when he explained the new construction techniques to his son. "There's something." "You're not telling me," he said finally. Elena was quiet for a long moment. "The board wants to build the facility regardless. If we don't do it this way, together with the community's involvement, they'll do it their way, corporate, isolated, secure." She gestured to her own fortress-like estate. "Like this. And I've learned that walls, no matter how well built, have a cost." The proposal seemed to weigh heavier in Mark's hands. He thought about the stranger he'd pulled from the rubble, who turned out to be so much more than her public image suggested. About how some things, like trust, like community, like the connection between two people, couldn't be engineered or bought. "I have conditions," he said. Eleanor's eyebrow raised slightly. "Such as?" "Local hiring stays at 70% minimum. The community center's programs get priority funding. And—" he met her gaze directly. "No more hiding behind corporate subsidiaries. If we're partners openly. The board won't like that last one." "Probably not, but I think you do." She didn't answer immediately, but something shifted. In her expression, a wall coming down, a truth rising up. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Mark extended his hand across the desk. Elena took it, and for a moment they were back in that storm-ravaged basement, two people connecting despite the chaos around them. Only this time, they could see each other clearly. The proposal lay between them, no longer just a business document, but a blueprint for something newer and truer than either of them had planned. The community center plans were spread across folding tables in the temporary meeting space, covered with sticky notes and coffee stains, evidence of countless community planning sessions. What had started as Elena's corporate vision had evolved into something organic, shaped by dozens of local hands and minds. "The senior center wants their quilting circle near the quantum lab," Mark said, fighting back a smile as he moved another sticky note. "Mrs. Rodriguez says the vibrations from the cooling systems help them keep rhythm." Eleanor leaned over the plans, her shoulder brushing his. These days, she dressed more practically for their site visits, though Mark suspected her casual work clothes still cost more than his truck payments. We can adjust the dampeners to create a gentle hum, might actually help stabilize the quantum states. You're serious, aren't you? The best innovations often come from unexpected connections. She straightened up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he'd noticed she made when she was both amused and thoughtful, like a quilting circle and a quantum computer finding harmony. Around them, the temporary space hummed with activity. Carlos was teaching a group of high school students about advanced materials science, using samples from the construction site to demonstrate principles that would have seemed alien just months ago. In the corner, Jenny and her robotics club were testing their latest creation, a debris-clearing robot they'd designed with help from Elena's engineers. "Dad!" Jenny called out. "Watch this!" The robot executed a perfect series of movements, collecting scattered building materials and sorting them by type. Elena had been right about the kids' potential. Given the right tools and support, they were already innovating solutions to their town's challenges. "Speaking of unexpected connections," Elena said softly, "the board is flying in next week. They want to see what we're doing with their money." There was a tension in her voice that Mark had learned to recognize. "Worried? They're expecting a standard corporate facility. What we're building," she gestured to the plans, to the room full of activity, to the way their project had become intertwined with the community's daily life. "This is something else entirely." Mark studied her profile, seeing past the composed exterior to the woman who'd been slowly emerging over weeks of collaboration. The Elena who joined town hall meetings and remembered everyone's names, who spent weekends helping Jenny's robotics club and discussing quantum physics with fascinated seniors. "Show them," he said simply. "Show them what?" "Everything. The training programs, the integrated design, the way the whole town's involved in the planning. Show them why this matters." A commotion at the door drew their attention. Wilson from the market was leading a group of locals in, carrying trays of food. The weekly community dinner had become a tradition, everyone bringing dishes, sharing updates, celebrating small victories in the rebuilding process. "Ms. Chen," Mrs. Rodriguez called out, "I made those dumplings you mentioned missing from your childhood. My recipe's different from your mother's, but—" Elena's composure cracked slightly. She'd mentioned her mother's cooking once, weeks ago, during a late-night planning session. The fact that Mrs. Rodriguez had remembered, had cared enough to try. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with something more than professional gratitude. Mark watched as she was drawn into the gathering, accepting a plate, listening to stories, becoming part of the fabric of the community she'd once observed from afar. The corporate titan was still there in her bearing, her intelligence, her drive, but now there was something else too. Something real and warm and growing. "Your friend," Carlos said quietly, appearing at Mark's elbow. "She's not what I expected." Mark thought about the woman he'd pulled from the storm, the one who'd held his hand in the darkness, about how that moment of connection had spiraled out into something that was transforming not just Cedar Grove, but everyone it touched. "No," he agreed, "she's not." Across the room, Eleanor caught his eye and smiled, not her professional smile, but something genuine and a little uncertain. In that moment, Mark realized they were building more than just buildings, more than just a partnership between a construction company and a tech giant. They were building bridges between past and future, between corporate power and community spirit, between two people who'd found each other in the chaos of a storm and were still discovering what that meant. The community center plans lay before him, marked with hundreds of small adjustments and improvements suggested by the people who would use it. Not just Elena's vision anymore, not just his expertise, but a true collaboration, a blueprint for something that hadn't existed before, something that could only have grown from the fertile ground of trust, respect, and perhaps something more that neither of them was ready to name. The newspaper landed on Eleanor's desk like a bomb waiting to explode. Tech Titans Tornado Romance, screamed the headline, accompanied by a photo of her and Mark at the construction site, heads bent close over blueprints. The article below wove a sensational tale of the billionaire and the builder, complete with anonymous sources speculating about their intimate professional relationship and questioning the legitimacy of the contracts awarded to his company. Richard stood at attention, his usual unflappable demeanor showing cracks of concern. It's gone national. The board is demanding an emergency meeting, and the financial press is already running speculation pieces about corporate governance and conflict of interest. Elena's fingers traced the grainy newspaper photo. The camera had caught a moment she recognized. Mark explaining a structural detail, her listening intently. But it had also caught something she hadn't been ready to see. The way they leaned into each other's space, the natural intimacy of their stance, the unguarded smile on her face. "Get me Mark Thompson on the phone," she said. "Ms. Chen, Elena." Richards hesitated. "The board is suggesting you recuse yourself from the project immediately. They're concerned about—" "Get me Mark," she repeated, her voice carrying an edge that brooked no argument. But before Richards could move, her private line lit up. Mark's name flashed on the screen. "I guess you've seen it," he said when she answered, his voice tight with something between anger and concern. "The board's calling for my resignation from the project." She kept her tone clinical, professional. "They're questioning every contract, every decision we've made. I've got reporters camped outside my house. Jenny couldn't even get to school without being photographed." A pause. "Elena, I need to know, was any of this, were the contracts—" "No," the word came out sharper than she intended. "Everything was legitimate. Everything was earned. You know that, do I?" His voice softened. "Eleanor, what are we doing here?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. What had started as a simple rescue, evolved into a business partnership and grown into— what exactly? A knock interrupted her response. Richards, holding a tablet displaying urgent message headers, the board demanding immediate action. Stock, prices fluctuating, social media exploding with hashtags and speculation. "I have to go," she said. "Mark, don't talk to any reporters. Not yet. Let me handle this." But handling it proved impossible. By afternoon, the story had grown legs of its own. Every business decision was being scrutinized through the lens of their supposed relationship. Critics pointed to the unprecedented community involvement as evidence of compromised judgment. The quantum facility's innovative design was recast. As an expensive indulgence to impress a local builder, Elena sat in her corporate war room, surrounded by PR experts and legal advisors, all offering variations on the same solution. Distance herself from the project, from the community, from Mark, save the company's reputation at the cost of everything they'd built. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "They're saying Dad only got the contracts because of you. He won't say anything, but I know it's hurting him. Please help." Another message followed quickly. "And they're wrong about him. About both of you." Elena closed her eyes, remembering the moment in the storm when titles and wealth had meant nothing, when a man had simply reached out to help a stranger, asking nothing in return. Everything that had grown from that moment, the partnership, the community bonds, the transformation of Cedar Grove, had been real, organic, true. The newspaper lay accusingly on her desk, its headline a mockery of something precious and unnamed. She picked it up, seeing past the sensational text to the truth captured in that candid photo. They hadn't been playing roles then, the billionaire, the builder. They had simply been Elena and Mark, creating something meaningful together. "Miss Chen?" Richards appeared with another update. "The board has called an emergency vote for tomorrow morning. They're prepared to suspend the entire Cedar Grove initiative pending review." Eleanor stood, decision crystallizing. "Call a press conference. Here, in Cedar Grove, not at corporate headquarters, and get me Mark Thompson. The board strongly advises against—" "The board," Elena said quietly, "doesn't understand what we've built here. But they're going to. She found Mark at the community center construction site, supervising despite the circus of reporters at the perimeter. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Recognition, resolution, truth. "They want me to shut it down," she said without preamble. "To save face, save stock prices, save the corporate image." And, his voice was carefully neutral. "And I realized something." She gestured to the rising framework around them, to the community members still working despite the media frenzy, to the future they'd envisioned together. "Some things are worth more than a good quarterly report." Mark studied her face. "Elena, I can step back. If this is damaging your company, that's not who we are." She stepped closer, past professional distance, past careful boundaries. "You taught me that, when you ran into a collapsing building to save a stranger. When you showed me that real connections, to people, to community, to purpose, matter more than corporate walls." A camera flashed somewhere beyond the construction barriers. Elena didn't flinch. "So what do we do?" Mark asked. "We show them." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had all day. "We show them everything. The training programs, the community. Integration, the innovation happening right here. We show them why this matters, not just for Cedar Grove, but as a model for every tech company trying to expand without losing its soul. And us?" The question was soft, meant only for her ears. Elena thought about the newspaper photo, about the truth it had captured that she'd been too cautious to acknowledge. "That's part of the story too, if you're willing." Mark's hand found hers, work-roughened fingers intertwining with manicured ones. Around them, the community center continued to rise, a physical manifestation of what could happen when people dared to build something real together. The newspaper would eventually be filed away, its sensational headline fading into history. But the truth it had inadvertently exposed about partnership, about purpose, about the power of human connection, would continue to grow, stronger than any storm, more lasting than any headline. Mark's resignation letter sat in his truck's glove box, the words carefully chosen to take all responsibility, to give Elena and her board a clean break. He'd written it at dawn, watching the sun rise over the half-built community center, remembering his father's words about sacrifice and duty. "The decision to terminate all contracts between Thompson Construction and Chen Quantum Technologies is entirely my choice," he'd written. "Any appearance of impropriety is my sole responsibility. Ms. Chen's vision for Cedar Grove remains vital and necessary for our community's future." The morning news droned from his truck's radio. Sources inside Chen Quantum Technologies suggest the board is considering legal action to recover funds from what they're calling compromised contracts. The reclusive CEO's relationship with a local contractor has raised questions about corporate governance. Mark switched it off, his hand brushing against Jenny's robot-designed notebook, still sitting in the passenger seat from their last drive to the community center. She'd been quiet this morning, watching him with her mother's perceptive eyes as he'd made breakfast. "You're giving up," she'd said finally, not touching her pancakes. "I'm protecting what matters," he'd responded, but the words had sounded hollow even to him. Now, parked at the construction site, he watched his crew working on the community center's framework. Carlos was teaching 2 local kids about the quantum-shielded cabling, knowledge that would have seemed impossible in Cedar Grove just months ago. His phone buzzed, Elena's private number, the 3rd call this morning. He let it go to voicemail, just like the others. "Boss?" Carlos approached, concern etched on his face. "You see the news?" Mark nodded, reaching for the resignation letter. "Get everyone together. I need to—" "Mark Thompson!" The voice cut through the morning air like a whip. Elena Chen stood at the site entrance, dispensing with her usual corporate calm. She wore work boots with her designer outfit, looking somehow more real, more present than she had even during the tornado. "Miss Chen," he started, formal and distant, but she cut him off. "Don't you dare," she said, crossing the distance between them. Don't you dare try to be noble about this." She snatched the resignation letter from his hand before he could stop her, scanning it quickly. Her expression shifted from anger to something more complex. "You thought this would protect me?" she asked, her voice softening. "Protect the project?" "The board needs someone to blame," Mark said. "Better me than you. The quantum facility, the development plans, Cedar Grove needs those more than it needs one construction company." "You still don't understand, do you?" Elena stepped closer, heedless of the watching crew, of the potential photographers at the site boundary. "This was never just about buildings and contracts. What we've created here, the integration, the community involvement, the organic growth, it only works because of trust, because of connections. Connections that are hurting your company," Mark pointed out. "Your stock price will recover. But trust, real partnerships, those are harder to rebuild once broken." She held up the resignation letter. "This isn't protecting anyone. It's running away." Mark thought of Jenny's eyes over breakfast, of Carlos teaching local kids about quantum technology, of Mrs. Rodriguez planning quantum-synchronized quilting circles, of Elena's hand in his during the storm, neither of them knowing or caring about titles and corporate positions. "I don't want to be the reason your vision fails," he said quietly. "Then don't leave." Elena's voice carried the same intensity. She'd used in board meetings, but with an undertone he'd only heard in their private conversations. "Stay and help me show them why this matters. Why doing things differently, doing them right, is worth fighting for." She tore the resignation letter in half, then quarters. "The board wants to see spreadsheets and profit projections. Fine. But first, they're going to see what real community development looks like, what happens when you tear down walls instead of building them." The morning sun caught the falling pieces of Mark's resignation letter, scattering them like leaves. In the wind, around them, construction continued, not just of buildings, but of possibilities, of futures, of connections that ran deeper than corporate structures or public opinions. "Okay," Mark said finally, seeing not the corporate titan, but the woman who'd chosen to step out of her fortress, who dared to build something real in the aftermath of chaos. "What's the plan?" Elena smiled, and in that smile he saw the future. They'd been designing together, one blueprint, one connection, one truth at a time. The town hall meeting minutes would later become a testament to the night Cedar Grove found its collective voice. The document, typed up by Mrs. Rodriguez with her characteristic attention to detail, began simply, "Emergency community meeting, 7:00 p.m. Attendance, standing room only. Purpose, to address the future of the Chen-Thompson Partnership and Cedar Grove's Development Initiative." Eleanor stood at the podium in the temporary municipal building, her corporate armor softened by determination and something that looked, surprisingly, like hope. Mark sat in the front row with Jenny, watching the woman who'd once hidden behind walls of wealth and protocol lay out the stark reality of their situation. "The board arrives tomorrow," Elena explained to the packed room. "They're prepared to shut down everything we've built here. Not just the quantum facility, but all of it. The training programs, the community center, the educational initiatives." A murmur of protest rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Wilson from the market stood up, clutching a folder of receipts. "But her business is up 40% since the rebuilding started. We're hiring local kids, teaching them real skills." "My son got accepted to MIT, Carlos called out from the back. "The quantum programming class here, the one they said was too advanced for a small town, that's what did it." More voices joined in, each with a story of transformation. The high school science teacher talking about students suddenly excited about physics. The elderly quilting circle showing off their quantum-inspired patterns. Local businesses reporting growth, innovation, purpose. Jenny raised her hand, her voice clear in the crowded room. "I was going to leave after high school. Everyone does, because there's nothing here for people who want to build the future." She looked at Elena, then her father. "But you showed us we can build that future right here." Mark watched Elena's face as she absorbed these testimonials. The corporate titan was still there in her bearing, but now integrated with something more human, more real. She caught his eye and smiled slightly, a private moment in the public storm. The minutes recorded what happened next. Motion proposed by Elena Chen to present a unified community development model to the board, demonstrating the measurable benefits of integrated corporate community partnerships, seconded by Mark Thompson. What the minutes couldn't capture was the electricity in the room as people stepped forward with ideas. The quantum facility's designs were reimagined through local eyes. Traditional skills were woven into cutting-edge technology. Cedar Grove wasn't just accepting progress, it was helping shape it. The board thinks this is about contracts and corporate governance, Elena said, her voice carrying to every corner. They need to see it's about something bigger, something that could change how tech companies interact with communities across the country. Mr. Wilson stood up, his market apron still on. Then let's show them, all of us, tomorrow. The minutes recorded the vote as unanimous, but they couldn't capture the feeling in the room, the sense of a community discovering its own power, its own worth. After the meeting, Mark found Eleanor studying the community center blueprints yet again. Having second thoughts? He asked. The opposite. She traced the intersection where the quantum lab would meet the public spaces. I've spent my career building walls around my company, my technology, myself. Tomorrow we're asking the board to tear them all down. Scary, terrifying. She looked up at him with a smile that held equal parts vulnerability and strength. Worth it? Mark thought about the packed town hall, about Jenny's renewed hope for her hometown, about the woman who'd emerged from behind her corporate walls to build something real. Always. The meeting minutes concluded with a simple line. Meeting adjourned 9:45 p.m. Tomorrow, Cedar Grove stands together. What it didn't record was how Elena and Mark lingered after everyone left, their shoulders touching as they refined their presentation for the board. It didn't capture how their professional partnership had grown into something that defied corporate categories or public speculation, something as organic and powerful as the community they were fighting to protect. The minutes became another artifact of their journey, official, typed, and filed away. But the real story was in what wasn't written. The quiet determination of two people who'd found each other in a storm, now weathering a different kind of tempest together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in the quiet aftermath of community action, they had all the certainty they needed. The legal documents lay before Elena like a corporate ultimatum, a restructuring plan that would separate Chen Quantum Technologies from its non-essential community initiatives. The board members sat around the conference table in their temporary Cedar Grove office, their expressions a mixture of concern and condescension. It's quite reasonable, Elena, Harrison, the lead director, said. You maintain nominal oversight of the quantum facility. We install a new local management team, and all this community entanglement gets sorted out properly. He glanced through the window at the town below. Everyone saves face. Elena studied the documents, her finger tracing the clause that would effectively end everything they'd built. The morning sun through the windows caught the gold of her pen, a gift from her father when she'd taken over the company. Build walls high enough, he'd said, and nothing can hurt you. But walls, she'd learned, could also keep out everything. Worth fighting for. A knock interrupted her response. Richards entered with a tablet displaying live security feeds. Ms. Chen, you should see this. The footage showed Cedar Grove awakening, but not in its usual way. People were gathering, dozens, then hundreds. Construction workers in hard hats, teachers with their students, senior citizens and small business owners. They formed a line that stretched from the community center all the way to the corporate offices. What is this? Harrison demanded. This, Elena said quietly, is what you're trying to restructure away. She stood, walking to the window. Mark stood at the head of the gathering crowd, Jenny beside him with her robotics club. Carlos and his MIT-bound son were there, along with Mrs. Rodriguez and her quantum-synchronized quilting circle. Each person held something representing their connection to the project. blueprints, educational certificates, business growth charts, technological innovations. The quantum facility was never meant to be just another corporate outpost, Elena continued. It was meant to be integrated, organic, grown from the community it serves. She turned back to the board. What you see as entanglement, I see as strength. Harrison sighed. Elena, the shareholders, will see better returns from a model that creates lasting value, not just quarterly profits. She picked up the restructuring documents. You want numbers? I'll show you numbers. She pressed a button, and the conference room screens lit up with data. Crime rates down, education metrics up, small business growth exceeding projections, patent applications from local inventors, university acceptance rates climbing. But the real value, Elena gestured to the window, look outside. This is what sustainable corporate expansion looks like, not dropping facilities into communities, but growing them together. Every person out there is a stakeholder in our success, not just a line item in our labor costs. And Thompson, Harrison's voice carried an edge. Is he a stakeholder or something more personal? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. He showed me what I'd forgotten behind all our corporate walls, that real innovation comes from connection, not isolation. She smiled slightly. Consider that my personal and professional opinion. The board members shifted uncomfortably, but Eleanor wasn't finished. She pulled out her own documents, a counter-proposal she and Mark had worked on late into the night. I'm prepared to stake my position on this. If the board wants to restructure something, restructure my role. I'll step down as CEO and become head of community integration and development. Make this model our new standard for expansion. Harrison stared at her. You'd give up the CEO position? For this? For the chance to build something real? Yes. Eleanor's voice carried absolute conviction. The question is, are you willing to learn from what we've created here, or would you rather cling to outdated corporate models? The legal documents sat between them. The board's restructuring plan versus Eleanor's vision for transformation. Outside, Cedar Grove waited, hundreds of lives intertwined with the choice about to be made. Harrison studied the crowd through the window, his expression slowly shifting from dismissal to consideration. The shareholders will need convincing. Then let me show you, Elena said. Not just spreadsheets and projections. Let me show you what happens when you tear down walls instead of building them. She reached for her father's pen, not to sign away what they'd built, but to write the next chapter. Beyond the corporate offices, Mark caught her eye through the window and nodded slightly. He'd shown her the power of building connections. Now it was her turn to build them on a scale that could transform not just Cedar Grove, but the very nature of corporate community relationships. The choice, in the end, wasn't really a choice at all. It was a recognition of truth, that the strongest foundations aren't built of concrete and steel, but of trust, innovation, and human connection. The partnership agreement emerged from the board's legal team, looking nothing like their usual corporate documents. Instead of cold legalese, it outlined a new model of community-integrated development that would become known as the Cedar Grove framework. But it was the signature page that told the real story. Elena Chen and Mark Thompson's names side by side, followed by 24 community leader signatures, a testament to unity that transcended traditional corporate boundaries. I've never seen anything quite like this, Harrison admitted, watching the impromptu celebration that had broken out in the community center's framework. Board members mingled with construction workers, quantum physicists chatted with quilting. Circle members and children demonstrated their robots to fascinated corporate executives. Elena stood with Mark at the center of it all, their professional dignity softened by the genuine joy around them. That's rather the point, she said. We're not just building a facility. We're creating a template for how technology companies can truly partner with communities, Jenny burst through the crowd, waving a letter. "Dad, Ms. Chen, MIT wants to establish a satellite research program here. They said our quantum-integrated community approach is uniquely innovative." Mark caught Elena's eye, sharing a moment of quiet triumph. The woman who'd once hidden behind corporate walls now moved easily through the crowd, her natural grace enhanced by genuine connection. The builder who'd once struggled to keep his small company afloat now spoke confidently with board members about scaling the Cedar Grove model nationally. Carlos approached with his son and a group of local students. "We've been adapting the quantum shielding techniques for small-scale agricultural applications," he explained to the fascinated board members. "The kids here figured out how to modify the technology to protect crops from extreme weather. Local innovation driving corporate R&D." Harrison mused. "It's almost like the community isn't just a host for corporate ambitions, but a true partner in innovation," Elena finished. She gestured to the partnership agreement. "That's what we've been trying to tell you. The walls between corporate and community, between technology and tradition, between progress and preservation, they're artificial, and they're holding everyone back." As if to emphasize her point, Mrs. Rodriguez's quilting circle had set up in one corner, their traditional patterns now incorporating designs inspired by quantum wave functions. Nearby, Elena's quantum engineers were earnestly discussing how the quilter's intuitive understanding of pattern mathematics might apply to quantum error correction. Mark touched Elena's elbow gently. "Should we show them?" She nodded, and together they led the board to the holographic display at the center of the room. The community center's final design sprang to life, not just a building, but a living symbol of integration. Quantum research spaces flowed naturally into public areas. Educational facilities merged with corporate training centers, local businesses, and tech startups shared collaborative spaces. "The quantum facility isn't just being built in Cedar Grove," Mark explained. "It's growing from Cedar Grove. Every innovation, every design element, every success is shared." "And the returns?" Harrison asked, though his tone had lost its skepticism. Elena smiled. "Check the new patent applications. Half of them came from community members working with our quantum team. The quilting circle's pattern recognition algorithm alone has implications for quantum computing that our best scientists hadn't considered." The partnership agreement sat on a nearby table, its signatures still fresh. More than a legal document, it was a blueprint for transformation, both corporate and personal. Elena picked it up, running her fingers over their joined names. "When I first came to Cedar Grove, I thought I was just building another facility," she said quietly. "Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." "A new corporate development model?" Harrison suggested. "That too," Elena said, her eyes meeting Mark's. "But mainly, I found out what happens when you stop hiding behind walls and start building bridges instead." The celebration continued around them, a living demonstration of their vision. Board members who'd arrived skeptical were now deep in conversation with community members, catching the infectious energy of genuine collaboration. The partnership agreement's framework was already being discussed as a model for other tech companies looking to expand into rural areas. But at the heart of it all stood Elena and Mark, their professional partnership now openly acknowledged as something deeper. The woman from the fortress and the builder from the storm had found each other, and in doing so, had built something neither could have imagined alone. "Ready for what comes next?" Mark asked softly. Elena looked at their joined names on the partnership agreement, then at the vibrant community around them, their shared vision coming to life in ways that transcended corporate strategies and bottom lines. "With the right partner," she said, "anything's possible." The new house keys felt different in Elena's hand, warmer somehow, more personal than the electronic fobs and security cards that had governed her life for so long. The modest craftsman house sat halfway between the quantum facility and the town centre, its design a collaboration between her architects and Mark's construction expertise. A home meant for connection, not isolation. "The movers can handle the rest," Mark said, watching her hesitate at the threshold. "Unless you're having second thoughts about leaving the fortress?" Elena smiled, remembering the walls she'd hidden behind for so long. "The only thing up there is echoes." She turned the key, opening the door to their shared future. "Besides, how else will we host the community innovation dinners?" Through the window, she could see the quantum facility rising alongside the community center, their integrated design a physical testament to the changes they'd brought to Cedar Grove. Jenny's robotics club had already claimed one of the collaborative spaces, their creative chaos spilling into the quantum research areas in ways that had already spawned 3 patent applications. "Welcome home," Mark said softly, his hand finding hers. Elena looked at the key in their joined hands, such a simple thing to represent such a profound change. The woman who'd once ruled her tech empire from behind fortress walls had found something better, a foundation built on trust, innovation, and love. She turned the key, stepping into their future together. 1 year later, the time capsule sat, ready to be sealed into the community center's cornerstone. Elena and Mark stood before the gathered crowd, their fingers intertwined as they looked at the collection of artifacts that told their story. The damaged pocket watch that had stopped during the tornado, the newspaper that had exposed their connection, the first partnership agreement that had changed everything. Jenny stepped forward, adding her original robot design notebook. "For the next generation of innovators," she said, now wearing her MIT early admission letter like a badge of honor. Behind her, the quantum facility hummed with activity, its boundaries with the community center so seamlessly integrated that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. "The Cedar Grove model is being adopted by tech companies nationwide," Elena addressed the crowd, her corporate polish now warmed by genuine connection. "But they're not just copying our facility designs or programs. They're learning what we learned, that the strongest innovations come from breaking down walls, not building them." Mark squeezed her hand, remembering the stranger he'd pulled from the storm.